So protests against Israel's war, its slaughter, its genocide in Gaza, and of course America's support of those efforts are continuing on college campuses all over the country. Some of the protests have been peaceful all the way through, but at other ones we've seen violence from every side. From people that were told are pro-Palestine demonstrators to pro-Israel counter-demonstrators, the police, universities themselves. And at this point, it's become pretty obvious that at places like Columbia, these protests have no doubt absolutely been infiltrated by communist radicals, many of whom are Jewish themselves, or who are working on behalf of Jewish interests, and who are now delegitimizing the very legitimate protest against the slaughter of Palestinians and the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. Just this week on the Fox News channel, we saw this report. Fox had a story about how the Pritzker family, the Jewish billionaires behind the Hyatt hotel chain, and whose scion is J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, is funding this huge number of these pro-Palestine groups, which is amazing when you consider that J.B. Pritzker is a corporate Democrat who supports Israel and vehemently opposes calls for a ceasefire. So everybody knows now. I mean, it's rather obvious if you just look with your eyes and say, yep, my eyes are not lying. You can see what's happening here. And it's that subversive Jews are trying to control both sides. And the Pritzkers are just one example. Though, by the way, Fox didn't mention a single time in their entire report on the Pritzker family that they're actually Jewish. God, I wonder why. But I digress. It's not just the Pritzkers. As some of these protests have taken an ugly turn, NGOs linked to George Soros, weird, and their highly trained professional protesters have started popping up all over the place. They're rolling out the very same playbook that they did over the Summer of Love in 2020. The same playbook that they used for Occupy Wall Street and in color revolutions all over the world. These subversive freaks come in, they seize control, they absorb or run off groups with real grievances, and then they merge the protest's original cause with all of their own pet issues like anti-whiteism and open borders and homosexuality, and then they ratchet up the aggression, they ratchet up the violence until they get what they want. And what they want is not always what they say it is. It's not always their list of demands. Oftentimes, they're hoping for as extreme a reaction as possible so they can destabilize the situation even further. And so as people have started realizing what's going on here, sympathy for many, not all, but many of these Ivy League protesters is just drying up. But even as this happens, sympathy and support for Israel aren't exactly bouncing back. There's been a third position carved out through all of this that's now becoming very widespread across the political spectrum. Americans are finally questioning the influence and control that not just Israel, but Jews in general have over the United States. Remember, they make up just 2.4% of the total population. All of this Jewish-backed violence in the United States and the Middle East has started waking people up to the fact that Israel and its tentacles, all of its octopus legs, are controlling more than one end of this entire thing. And a big part of the open borders ideology behind these protests is a desire to send at least 1 million Palestinian refugees to the United States, to get them off their land in Gaza, to pave the way for Israeli expansion. Do you see what's happening here? They want to dump these people here, right on top of us. But before they do, they'll be sure to remind them that America gave Israel the money and munitions to wipe Gaza off the map and send the survivors packing. So, what type of sentiment do you think these people are coming here with? Yeah, there's weapons caches and dirty bombs and people who hate you and hate your ideology and hate your faith and hate your whiteness pouring across the borders and then settling in the interior of our country. It's a recipe for complete collapse. A perfect recipe for destabilization and a complete collapse of the United States. Our friend Kurt Doolittle has a really good X post up that's starting to get some attention. And in it, he responds to Shai Davidoff, that the Israeli citizen who's somehow become the face of Jewish victimhood at Columbia University, he explains to him why compassion for Jews is waning so significantly. Kurt says, quote, "I agree with the outrage of the population against these miscreants who use chaos and violence to persecute Jews living in the West, and any such behavior, whether against Jews or any other people or ideology or policy at all. But until the Jewish people, their intellectuals, their culture and tradition recognize and accept, as Europeans have of their own history, that the Jews are the source of so much of the tragedy that justly befell them, as well as the disdain for their continued behavior that's hostile to the masculine, to the European, to the meritocratic, and to true, as well as the interests of those elsewhere. Sorry, I was botching that a little bit. We have it on the screen for all of you really brilliant people who can consume information. Because, and continuing here, because until the Jewish people's tradition of morals and ethics, maximization of rent-seeking and free-riding, revolutionary sedition, and the preference for occupations that profit from baiting into hazard, that while providing such wealth are in fact parasitic and harmful, especially under modern-day fiat money, then the cycle of retaliation, oppression, will continue. But while white people can learn from our mistakes and adapt, it appears that Jewish people not only have no interest, but no capacity, which is a conclusion that the world will increasingly come to and will lead to worse than even the most heinous events that have happened in the past. So take this crisis and learn from it, because as many of us are perfectly happy that you live with us, but there are no people on earth remaining who will tolerate you living both within and against them, which is the best reason for an expansionary and strong Israel that will teach the Jewish people the morals and ethics of rule and statehood that they have never seemed to be capable of learning. It may be the only means of reform of Jewish people and culture, end quote. You know, as I'm reading that, and as I read it the first time, I mean, nobody can argue Kurt Doolittle is right. Jews in the Western world, especially here in the United States, and especially over the past several years, have been asserting their own self-serving agenda against the people who opened their borders and their societies and their governments to them, and against the very people who have ensured Israel's existence since 1948. They sponsor open borders. They sponsor atheism and the mockery of Christianity. They sponsor abortion. They sponsor homosexuality and perversion and degeneracy and transgenderism. And they send professional victims like Shai Davidal, who's been arrested on camera at violent protests in Israel, to get American students muzzled and painted as Hamas supporters. To expand on all of this, we're joined now by the author of that tweet. You hit the nail on the head. I'm sorry that I kind of botched that there, but as I'm reading it,
I didn't really know what had triggered you to call me this time.
Do you agree that these people are the sponsors of everything bad that's happening here, but they just don't realize that they're really doing it to themselves? I mean, this is like the ultimate programming by Israel against its own people that claim to be Jews.
One of the things I love about your show is you ask intelligent questions and let me give intelligent answers. Why is that rare?
Well, I mean, the obvious answer is because there is an intentional plan by the corporate media, who's owned by the very same people that we're talking about here, to dumb down information that's irrelevant, that won't make a difference, but to keep people just, consuming and then regurgitating these talking points. And I think that's what I think that's what I just realized when I was reading your tweet again, is as I'm processing this. This is exactly the Israelis have declared war on Americans, and they're on our soil doing it at campuses right now, using our law enforcement apparatus to bully and physically assault people who oppose like a genocidal ethnic cleansing, and then somehow have used the rhetoric to make you feel bad about opposing these efforts.
It's not just the West. It's that they can get away with it here.